Imagine walking into a bank, dressed in a sharp suit, confidence in every step, knowing your account holds more money than most people see in a lifetime. Now, imagine being treated like you don't belong, like you're invisible, or worse, a threat. That's exactly what happened when Marcus Williams, a self-made millionaire, walked into Crestview Bank to make a routine transaction. But little did the manager know, her arrogance and prejudice were about to cost her everything. Marcus had spent years building his empire. Smart investments, hard work, and discipline had turned him into one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the city. Today was supposed to be just another day, another quick stop at the bank before heading to an important business meeting. But the moment he stepped inside, something felt off. The stares, the whispered conversations, it was all too familiar. And then came the confrontation. The branch manager, a woman named Linda Carter, approached Marcus with a forced smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone laced with doubt. When Marcus calmly handed over his ID and requested a withdrawal, her expression changed. She scrutinized his information, glancing between him and the documents like something didn't add up. "I'm sorry," she said with a fake politeness, "but we'll need additional verification before we can process this request." Marcus frowned. He had been banking here for years. Never once had he needed extra verification. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Linda hesitated. "Well, we just have to be careful with large transactions. You understand, right?" Marcus did understand, just not in the way she meant. He knew exactly what was happening. He had seen it before. But before he could respond, Linda Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He had dealt with situations like this before, but it never got any easier. He glanced around the bank. Other customers were being helped without an issue. No extra verification, no questioning glances, just smooth, simple transactions. So why was he being treated differently? "I've been banking here for years," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "I've made larger withdrawals than this without a problem. What's different today?" Linda's smile thinned. "It's just policy," she said quickly, tapping her pen against the counter. "Nothing personal." Nothing personal. The words rang hollow. It was always nothing personal when people made assumptions, when they doubted him, when they put up invisible barriers just to see if he would give up and walk away. Marcus wasn't the type to back down. He leaned in slightly, keeping his tone professional but unshakable. "Then let's call the regional manager. I'd love to hear them confirm this policy." Linda's fingers twitched around her pen. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. She hadn't expected him to push back. She probably thought he'd mumble an apology and leave, like so many others before him. But Marcus wasn't like the others. Before she could respond, another employee, a young teller who had been watching the exchange, cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Williams' account is in perfect standing," he said cautiously, looking between Marcus and Linda. "We can process this transaction without any additional steps." Linda shot the teller a sharp look, but Marcus caught it. The tension in the air thickened. "That won't be necessary," Linda said curtly, placing a hand over the teller's keyboard. "I still need to verify a few things." Marcus exhaled slowly, his patience wearing thin. He knew exactly what this was. It wasn't policy. It wasn't protocol. It was about something deeper, something unspoken but painfully clear. The question was, how far was she willing to take this? Because if she thought he was going to let it slide, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The bank had gone quiet. Other customers stole glances, sensing something was off but unsure if they should step in or look away. The young teller shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Marcus and Linda. It was clear he wanted to say more, but Linda's presence kept him frozen. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but inside, frustration churned. He had worked too hard, built too much, to be treated like this. "All right," he said slowly, keeping his voice measured. "Let's go ahead and verify whatever you need." Linda hesitated. It was as if she hadn't expected him to comply, at least not so easily. She nodded stiffly, then turned to her computer, typing with exaggerated precision. The seconds dragged on. Then she sighed, shaking her head. "It looks like there's a flag on your account," she said, feigning regret. "We won't be able to process your transaction today." Marcus raised an eyebrow. A flag? That was new. He had checked his accounts just this morning. Everything was in perfect order. His patience was razor-thin now. "That's interesting," he said, pulling out his phone, "because I have full access to my account right here. No holds, no restrictions." He turned the screen toward her. Linda barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't override system issues. You'll have to contact corporate." Marcus exhaled sharply. He wasn't surprised, but the blatant nature of it still stung. He had seen this before, the way people in positions of power could twist policies, manipulate rules, all while maintaining a polite, professional tone. He was about to respond when a voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Both Marcus and Linda turned toward the sound. A man in an expensive navy suit stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. Jonathan Pierce, the bank's regional director, had just walked in. Linda stiffened. "No problem at all, sir," she said quickly, but there was an unmistakable flicker of unease in her eyes. Marcus folded his arms. "Actually, there is," he said calmly. "I'm being denied access to my own funds with no legitimate reason." Jonathan's gaze flickered to the young teller, who looked ready to melt into the floor. "Is that true?" The teller hesitated, glancing at Linda before nodding slightly. "Mr. Williams' account is in perfect standing, sir." Jonathan's face darkened as he turned back to Linda. "Then why, exactly, are we denying a valued client his transaction?" Linda opened her mouth, but no words came out. Meanwhile, Marcus studied her reaction carefully. It was subtle, but the panic was there. She wasn't expecting this. She thought she could make him disappear with a few flimsy excuses, that he would just accept it and leave. But now, with the regional director watching, she was losing control of the situation. Still, she wasn't ready to back down just yet. "I was just following procedure," she finally said, straightening her posture. "With large transactions, we have to be extra cautious." Jonathan gave her a long, unreadable look. "That's true," he said slowly. Then he turned to Marcus. "How much was the withdrawal for?" Marcus didn't break eye contact. 10,000. Jonathan nodded, then glanced back at Linda. "And how many large withdrawals have we processed today?" Linda hesitated again. The young teller swallowed hard. 3 others, sir. No extra verification was required." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He looked at Linda one more time, and something shifted in the air. Marcus knew it in that moment. She was in trouble. But the question was, how deep did this go? And how far was she willing to push before everything came crashing down around her? A heavy silence settled over the bank. The air felt thick, charged with an unspoken tension that everyone could feel, but no one dared to acknowledge. Linda shifted uncomfortably, her hands gripping the edge of the counter as if holding onto control that was already slipping away. Marcus stayed calm, but his patience had run out. He had given her every chance to correct herself, to fix what was happening before it went too far. But now, with Jonathan Pierce watching closely, there was nowhere for her to hide. "I'd like an answer," Jonathan said, his tone sharp but controlled. "Why was Mr. Williams singled out for additional verification when other large withdrawals were processed without issue?" Linda forced a tight smile. "I was just being cautious, sir. You know how fraud cases have been increasing lately." Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "And yet, only this specific transaction required extra steps. Do you have any documented reason for flagging his account?" The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The young teller stared at his screen, avoiding eye contact. A security guard near the entrance shifted slightly, watching the exchange unfold. Other customers pretended to be busy, but their ears were glued to the conversation. Linda swallowed hard. "I was just following my instincts," she said finally. Your instincts, Marcus repeated, tilting his head slightly. So, what exactly about me gave you a bad feeling? Linda's face paled just slightly, but she quickly covered it up with a defensive glare. I don't appreciate what you're implying. Jonathan exhaled through his nose, looking unimpressed. I don't care what you appreciate, Linda. What I care about is that one of our most valued clients was nearly denied service for no valid reason. That's unacceptable. Linda opened her mouth, but before she could speak, another voice cut in from the side. Excuse me, is there a problem here? A woman in a sleek navy blue suit approached, her presence commanding immediate respect. She walked with purpose, her expression unreadable. Marcus recognized her instantly, Victoria Langston, one of the top executives at the bank's corporate office. He hadn't expected her to be here, but judging by the way Jonathan straightened up, neither had he. Linda's face drained of color. Victoria stopped a few feet away, her sharp eyes scanning the scene before landing on Marcus. Mr. Williams, I assume, she asked, extending a hand. Marcus shook it firmly. That's me. She nodded before turning her attention to Linda. Would you like to explain what's going on here? Linda looked trapped, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for an escape route, but there wasn't one. Jonathan spoke before she could. It appears that Mr. Williams was denied a routine transaction under suspicious circumstances. Linda claims she was following her instincts. Victoria's expression darkened, her gaze snapping back to Linda. Your instincts. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Linda swallowed hard. I was just trying to be cautious. I didn't mean. But you did, Victoria interrupted. You made a judgment, and that judgment just put this entire branch in a very difficult position. Linda's hands clenched at her sides. I was only doing my job. Victoria crossed her arms. No, you were abusing your position. The room was deathly silent. Linda's breathing had quickened, her chest rising and falling as if she was fighting off panic. Marcus could see it now. She was realizing, too late, that this situation had spiraled far beyond what she had expected. She had thought she had the power here. She had thought she could make him feel small. But now, as she stood under the weight of the consequences bearing down on her, the power had shifted completely. The question was, what happened next? Because this wasn't over. Not yet. Linda stood frozen, her lips slightly parted as if she wanted to protest, but the words wouldn't come. The entire bank had become a stage, and every single person inside was an audience member watching her unravel. Victoria's sharp gaze stayed locked on her, waiting for an explanation that would never come. But just when it seemed like the situation had reached its peak, something unexpected happened. A phone rang. Not just any phone, the bank's direct corporate line. The young teller, still sitting stiffly at his station, glanced at the blinking light on the desk, his face paling as he hesitated. Victoria turned slightly. Answer it. The teller swallowed hard before picking up. Crestview Bank, this is Daniel speaking. There was a pause, then his eyebrows lifted in shock. Yes, ma'am, she's here. His gaze flickered toward Victoria before he held out the receiver. It's for you. Victoria took the phone without breaking eye contact with Linda. This is Victoria Langston. A deep silence followed as she listened. Whatever she was hearing, it was making her expression harden, her fingers tightening ever so slightly around the phone. A slow glance toward Marcus, then toward Jonathan, then finally back to Linda. I understand, Victoria said before hanging up. She took a step closer to Linda, her voice lowering but carrying even more weight. You're done lying. Corporate just reviewed Mr. Williams' account and transaction history. There was no flag, no issue, no concern whatsoever. Linda's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape. I must have made a mistake. Victoria cut her off. No, you didn't. You knew exactly what you were doing. But before she could continue, the second twist landed like a thunderclap. Marcus' phone vibrated in his hand. He glanced down at the screen, and his entire demeanor changed. His jaw clenched. His usually calm expression darkened. Slowly, he looked up at Linda, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You really don't know what you've done, do you?" he said quietly. Linda blinked rapidly, her face twisting with unease. "What are you talking about?" Marcus exhaled sharply, gripping his phone a little tighter. "I just got a security alert," he said, lifting the screen for everyone to see. "While you were stalling, someone tried to move money out of my account." A gasp rippled through the bank. Even Jonathan and Victoria looked stunned. Linda's reaction was instant, her eyes widened, and her breath hitched, but it was the way her hands twitched at her sides that told Marcus everything he needed to know. Victoria's gaze snapped back to Linda. "Is there something you'd like to confess?" Linda shook her head too quickly. I don't know anything about that." But the pieces were falling into place now, faster than she could stop them. The delay, the fake flag, the stalling. It had never been about suspicion. It had been about buying time. Jonathan turned to the teller. "Pull up the security logs. Now." Daniel's fingers flew across the keyboard. A moment later, his face went white. "Sir, there was an unauthorized login attempt on Mr. Williams' account from inside this branch." A chilling realization swept over everyone in the room. Linda didn't just discriminate against Marcus, she was trying to steal from him. The room felt electric with tension, the weight of the revelation crashing down like a tidal wave. But it still wasn't over, because now everyone wanted to know who else was involved, and just how far did this go. The bank was dead silent, the weight of the accusation hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Linda's face had gone pale, her hands twitching slightly as she struggled to keep her composure. But it was useless now. Everyone in the room had seen the truth unravel right in front of them. Victoria's gaze was locked onto her, unblinking, unreadable. "I'll ask you one last time," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Do you want to explain yourself before I call security?" Linda swallowed hard, her breathing uneven. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, shaking her head. "I don't know anything about a transfer." But Marcus was already a step ahead. He tapped a few buttons on his phone and turned the screen around. "Then explain why the attempted transfer came from a device linked to your employee login." The room collectively inhaled. Jonathan's eyes darkened as he turned to the teller. "Check her access logs." Daniel hesitated for only a second before pulling up the records. A few clicks later, his face went stiff. "It's her," he confirmed. "She accessed Mr. Williams' account 20 minutes ago, right before she started delaying his transaction." Linda's mask of denial cracked completely. She stumbled back a step, her lips parting as if trying to form an excuse, but nothing came out. The realization that she had lost, that she had been caught in real time, was settling in fast. Victoria turned to the security guard standing near the entrance. "Escort her to my office. Now." The guard stepped forward, but before he could reach her, Linda snapped. "You don't understand," she blurted out, her voice shaking with desperation. "I wasn't acting alone." That stopped everyone in their tracks. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What did you just say?" Linda let out a sharp breath, looking around frantically. Her carefully crafted arrogance was gone. Now she just looked panicked, cornered. "I was just supposed to stall you," she admitted, her voice quick and shaky. "Just long enough for the transfer to go through. But I didn't set it up. Someone else did." Jonathan stepped closer. "Who?" Linda's gaze darted around the bank, like she was debating whether to say it. Then finally, her eyes landed on someone. Marcus followed her stare, and his stomach tightened. It wasn't a random employee. It wasn't some outside hacker. It was Daniel, the young teller, the one who had spoken up earlier. The realization hit everyone at once. The nervous glances, the hesitation, the way he had been avoiding eye contact. Daniel took a slow step back, his face drained of color. I didn't. But it was too late. The evidence was already there. Linda had stalled Marcus, but Daniel had been the one with direct access to the transaction system. He was the one who would slip in unnoticed while everyone was distracted. Jonathan's expression darkened. "Security," he called out, his voice firm. "We need 2 escorts." Linda didn't fight as the guard took her arm, her body slumped in defeat. But Daniel? He turned, ready to make a run for the side exit, only for Marcus to step smoothly into his path. "Bad idea," Marcus said, his voice calm but full of warning. Daniel hesitated, his hands trembling. He knew it was over. With nowhere left to run, he finally dropped his head in resignation as security closed in. As they were led out of the bank, Victoria let out a slow breath, running a hand over her temple. "I can't believe this," she muttered, shaking her head. "An inside job, at my branch." Marcus exhaled, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "Believe it." Jonathan turned to him, looking more serious than ever. "Mr. Williams, we owe you more than just an apology. This was beyond unacceptable." Victoria nodded firmly. "Rest assured, there will be consequences. Not just for them, but for how this was allowed to happen in the first place." Marcus studied her for a moment, then finally gave a small nod. "Good," he said, "because I don't just let things like this slide." Victoria held his gaze, and for the first time she smiled. "Neither do I." The chaos had settled, but the weight of what had happened still lingered in the air. Employees whispered amongst themselves. Customers watched in stunned silence, and Marcus, he simply adjusted his cufflinks, turned back to the counter and looked at Jonathan. "Now," he said, his voice smooth but firm, "can I finally get my withdrawal?" The tension that had gripped the bank slowly began to ease, replaced by murmurs and exchanged glances as employees and customers processed everything that had just happened. Security had escorted Linda and Daniel out, their fates now in the hands of corporate and law enforcement. The weight of their actions had been exposed, and there was no undoing it. Jonathan took a deep breath and turned back to Marcus, a new level of respect in his eyes. "Mr. Williams, I want to personally assure you that this situation does not reflect the values of this bank. We will be launching a full internal investigation." Victoria stepped forward, her expression serious but sincere. "Not only that, but we'll be reviewing our policies to make sure something like this never happens again. No one should ever be treated the way you were today." Marcus studied them both for a moment before nodding. "That's a start." His voice was even, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. "I don't need words. I need action. Make sure this isn't just about me. Make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Victoria nodded. "You have my word." Satisfied, Marcus finally turned back to the teller's station, where a different employee now stood, looking both nervous and eager to assist. "Let's try this again," Marcus said, sliding his bank card across the counter. "I'd like to make a withdrawal." This time, there was no hesitation. Within minutes, the transaction was processed smoothly, and the large sum Marcus had originally requested was placed neatly into an envelope. As Marcus tucked it into his jacket, he caught the eyes of a few onlookers. Some nodded in silent acknowledgement, others simply looked relieved that justice had been served. Jonathan stepped forward again. "Is there anything else we can do for you today?" Marcus glanced around the bank, taking in the aftermath of everything that had unfolded. He let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "I think I've had enough banking excitement for one day." Victoria extended her hand once more. "We appreciate your patience through all of this." Marcus shook it firmly. "I don't have patience for injustice, but I do believe in accountability." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, his stride steady, his head held high. The automatic doors slid open, and as he stepped outside into the crisp air, he felt something settle in his chest, a sense of closure. Some lessons were learned the hard way, and today, those who thought they could judge a man by appearances alone had learned that lesson in the most unforgettable way.